Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of The Bullet. My name is Paul Lathrop. I'm the Deputy Director of New Media for the Second Amendment Foundation. Joining me today, a good friend and a longtime cohort in crime, Rob Morse. Rob, of course, is the guy behind Self-Defense Gun Stories and the co-host with me on Polite Society podcast. Rob, thanks for coming along today, man.
My pleasure, Paul. There's plenty to talk about.
There is. Let's go ahead. As we get started, I want to remind everybody, if you're watching us on the Polite Society podcast Facebook or YouTube pages, you can comment on those live videos, and we'll get those comments, get them up on the air. If you're catching us anywhere else, we may or may not see those comments right away. Although I do get an email that for Rumble comments. So Rumble, you're a little bit safer, but I may or may not see comments anywhere else. Let's go ahead and get started. Rob,
Is the best way to reach us to tweet?
It used to be, but Twitter, ever since they changed their blue check mark thing, my broadcast software can't get through. So it used to be, but not anymore. This didn't make it out in time to get on Polite Society yesterday, so I held it over for today. A press release from the Citizens Committee came out yesterday, and I love the take on this. Citizens Committee for the Right to Keep and Bear Arms has just identified the assault weapon gun banners don't want to ban. But when it comes to mayhem, this one has quite a big body count to its credit, including 8 people killed Sunday at a bus stop in Brownsville, Texas. A man identified as George Alvarez drove a motor vehicle into a crowd of pedestrians outside a migrant center in Brownsville, killing 8 and injuring 10 other people. The suspect has been charged with 8 counts of manslaughter and 10 counts of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. I'm going to skip down here in the press release just a little bit. These are all comments from Alan Gottlieb. Remember the 6 people murdered by Darrell E. Brooks when he drove an SUV through the annual Christmas parade in Waukesha, Wisconsin in 2021. 62 other people were injured in that rampage. 8 people were killed in New York City bike path in 2017. When an Islamic extremist deliberately ran them down with a rented pickup truck. The driver was punished. Not every truck owner in America was punished. And who can forget the 2016 mass murder in Nice, France, when a man drove a large truck into a crowd celebrating Bastille Day. He killed 84 people and injured hundreds more. And yet we're not hearing screams for banning of Chevy Silverados. I mean, who needs an assault pickup truck like that?
Do you remember the pictures of that large truck in France? It was stopped because someone shot the driver in the cab.
Yes.
Guns save lives. The media is working desperately, right out of the Ministry of Truth, to hide that from us. This is just another example. I was frankly offended by the media spin after this attack in Texas. It was right outside a gun-free zone. People who were going into the mall made themselves easier victims because they left their guns at home. Thank goodness there was an off-duty policeman nearby.
Yeah. And in most jurisdictions, I'm not going to say all, New York State and city being the exceptions, but in most jurisdictions, if you are a police officer, you're required to carry when you're out in public. So yeah, thankfully there was an off-duty law enforcement officer nearby. My understanding was earlier today I was reading, and it was 4 minutes from the time 911 was called to the time the shooter was down. So that's fairly quick for a mass shooting.
That's actually phenomenally quick. Usually it is seconds. If this is Here is the typical timeline. 1 out of a dozen people in the crowd is carrying concealed. What was that sound? People turn. They see something that alarms them and confirms that that was a gunshot.
Mm-hmm.
The next time the mass murderer does it is his last. He's typically shot from behind. Why can you shoot a mass murderer from behind? Put a gun in your face and look at a target. You'll notice that you're blind to virtually the entire world. Fortunately, we fill that world.
And you're absolutely right, and I hadn't thought much about that, but not when you're just thinking about, I want to go to and we will both be commenting and bringing this up as long as we're both in Second Amendment media. The Indiana Mall
Right.
situation where the mass killer was stopped after he killed one person. I do not know if he was shot from behind or not, but I do know he was shot at quite a distance.
Right. He was shot from someone who was behind cover. The stats get a little distorted. He prepared his rifle in the bathroom,
Yep.
took it out of its case. A guy who happened to be carrying concealed was his first victim. The concealed carrier walks in, gets shot point blank several times. And unfortunately for the defender, those shots were relatively muffled. It wasn't until the murderer came out and started shooting in the courtyard that the shots were heard. People looked, and I've forgotten the guy, Elijah
Dickens. Okay.
What? Elijah Dickens, isn't that it?
Deacons, something like that.
Got behind a pillar, braced himself, and put, was it 6 out of 8? 8 out of 10? He shot very well at a distance and stopped the guy right there.
One other thing is thinking of as a tactical standpoint, and we just did defensive gun uses last night, so I'm still in that mindset. But anytime you have something, I mean, he's behind cover, also bringing up the thought that he may be using that cover to help him stabilize the pistol.
Yes.
That will improve your accuracy. If you anytime you can put your arm or your firearm, or anytime you can stabilize against something that generally doesn't move, earthquake accepted, you're going to be better off.
What's interesting in that case too, at a distance, you're probably invisible to the murderer. He's not making a detailed scan to look for any anomaly in the background. His head's swinging around. He goes, "Who's shooting at me?" Probably never saw his attacker.
Probably, and one would hope he never saw. Is it just, I'm going to go on a killing spree. Oops, it's done.
Yep.
Next story I got up, and I forgot to mute my phone. I am being a bad boy today. Let me do that very fast. We had a press release come out on Friday, and the Second Amendment Foundation and the Citizens Committee for the Right to Keep and Bear Arms and several other related organizations are suing the Washington State Attorney General. And now it seems that there's more people piling on to sue the Washington State Attorney General. This is coming off the Truth About Guns. Is the state of Washington now at war with the lawful firearms industry as crime in the state of Washington continues to spiral out of control and the state legislature fails to take effective action towards public safety? New revelations about the state's extreme actions against lawful firearms industry are coming to light. The state is using auspices of their Consumer Protection Act contained within the 2022's large capacity magazine ban to cast a breathtakingly wide net over lawful firearms distribution industry. Most recently, the state publicly pursued numerous retailers for violating the magazine ban. The Consumer Protection Dragnet targeted federal way discount guns and has subsequently assessed $19.5 million fines for violations. The state is concurrently defending the ban in two federal lawsuits challenging the constitutionality of the magazine ban, but the CPA investigation continues to move full steam ahead. Now we're learning that the Attorney General's office is widening the scope of their investigation, not based on a documented willful violation by a retailer, but rather scooping up all records and communications from wholesalers nationwide. The latest target, Davison's, is an Arizona-based wholesaler that supplies retailers nationwide. The state, through its consumer investigative demand, has asked Davison's to supply all invoices, transfers, and communications of all matters with Washington-based firearms retailers going back to January 1, 2022. That's 6 months before the ban took effect and 3 months before the ban was even passed as a law. So they want to go back to way back 6 months. I mean, this was absolutely legal activity that they hadn't even passed the darn law yet. And yet they're expecting these wholesalers to have ESP enough to know that what's going to happen in the future so that they need to stop selling to Washington State before it's ever brought up?
No, that's just an excuse to punish their political opponents. What's really happening here is that Washington politicians are desperate to find a scapegoat that's acceptable to the media and to their voters that will mask their political failures. They let criminal loose. Crime went up. They said, we'll make you safe by banning guns. Crime went up. They need to find a scapegoat so that voters don't turn around and say, Mr. Politician, you made it worse. You put my family at risk. I'm going to vote you out of office. That's what they can't stand.
Yeah. At some point you have to wonder, not just Washington State, but Chicago, New York City, New York itself. When is it going to become the aha moment and the public goes, look, we've given you control for decades and things keep getting worse?
I was sitting at a lunch counter today, and finally I changed my seat so that I wasn't watching CNN. If you're just watching CNN, you will never, ever, ever get that truth, Paul. So more and more of us have turned off the mainstream media. We're now eclectic. We select our news bits and pieces at a time. I don't trust any given commentator for all my news. He's not an expert on it. I go to many individual experts, subject at a time. How about you? I suspect you're the same way.
Yes, well, as part of my job, absolutely, I am the same way. I look at a lot of different news sources every day. And oh, by the way, I want to put a free plug in, and I'm partially compensated. OpsLens has this thing called Worldview now.
Right.
And I have been playing with that thing, and that is one powerful tool that is available for you. There's a free 30-day trial to sign if you want to sign up for it. Use the promo code PSP 10%. But yeah, does
it work domestically, Paul?
Well, in areas of the country it does, and it expands more and more. but you can get from individual areas of the country. It does not. It's not an aggregator like, for example, Bearing Arms, or an aggregator like that. It draws off of blog posts. It draws off
Okay.
of a whole lot of different places, and it will allow you to say it's truly unfiltered. So you better have one up here to know
Right.
what you're looking at.
You'll have to provide your own filter.
Yeah, you could see, for example, I mean, just messing around with it the first night I had it, and I'm looking through there, and 7 people were discovered dead in Oklahoma when they were looking for a couple runaways,
Wow.
and on one private property, and that just, you know,
Sure.
so anyway, but
Tennessee.
I look at not just but I look at I do a DuckDuckGo search, I do a Google search, I do them both, even though I get a lot of the same results. I look at all kinds of different sources for my news every day, and
Let's talk about the news we didn't see, and I'm a little disappointed. Do you remember when we were waiting, it seemed like forever, for the Bruin decision to come down?
yes,
We're now in a similar situation, waiting for federal judge Roger Benitez to give us some ruling on some California firearms laws, in particular their assault weapons ban and their magazine ban.
yep,
Those were expected weeks ago. Illinois
those were
has,
expected a month ago.
okay, Illinois has so violated the U.S. Constitution that there have been appeals to the judges that oversee Supreme Court appeals from a particular district, in this case the 7th. Judge Amy Coney Barrett is pretty squared away when it comes to reading firearms law. Now, please don't misunderstand this. I'm not saying that the Supreme Court judges are simple. I'm saying that when it comes to firearms bans, that was settled back in Heller. That law is really pretty straightforward. And I'm pretty sure that Barrett knows it, and reading a bunch of gobbledygook is going to go, she used to be a prof. She'd go, nice try, you didn't understand the law. Was that all you had, or did you really not understand it? So those decisions or those comments should be coming out any day now. When they do, there's going to be another earthquake in this Second Amendment litigation.
There is, and I would expect Amy Coney Barrett, going back to her time as a federal appellate judge before she got appointed to the Supreme Court, confirmed
Right.
to the Supreme Court, was solidly pro Second Amendment.
Right.
And I would expect that what we get out of her will be favorable to gun
Right.
rights. And I slipped and said it again. Guns don't have rights. Favorable to Second Amendment rights.
Right. Well, to our rights. Yes.
Yes. Let me get a couple. We'll get a
You
couple
do
comments
that,
in
and
here.
I'll review Tennessee.
All right. Wants to get Gerald in. He says, I like Newsmax. Fast forward local stations news that are recorded. Listen to podcasts while I work. Lars Larson, The Bullet, and Dan Bongino.
There you go. Not a bad spread.
No. Lars is a good guy. I run into Lars, had a brief conversation with him at SHOT Show. He broadcasts every year at SHOT Show. He's got a good head on his shoulders, and he's got his thinking cap squared away. And then
Speaking of which, Gerald texted us. Bongino was thrown off Fox. I assume he still has his own video blog or podcast.
Bongino still has a radio show.
Oh, okay.
I believe, isn't Bongino in Rush's old slot? Rush Limbaugh's old slot. Anyway. And CNT Designs and Arms says Amy Coney Barrett was on the Seventh Circuit.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. And Michael on the Facebook side says, when judges can't define a woman, how can they define the Second Amendment? Make no mistake, the Supreme Court will be able to define what a woman is. And they'll have no problem defining the Second Amendment.
No, they didn't. The most, I can't pronounce her first name, last name's Brown, the most recent appointee to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Ketanji Jackson Brown, have I got that right?
Yeah, she refused to say what a woman was. I'm not a biologist, I can't say. So
she's only one of 9, though.
Thank goodness, Michael, you're not wrong. Fortunately, a lot of them are smart enough to solve both problems for us. Tennessee?
Yeah, let's talk about this. This is not great news out of Tennessee.
Tennessee Governor Bill Lee, a nominal Republican, announced that he'd call lawmakers back into session. The announcement came weeks after 6 people, including 3 young children, were murdered in a Nashville school shooting. The tragedy sparked Lee to urge the General Assembly to pass legislation that would keep firearms away from people who could harm themselves or others. Instead, GOP leaders moved to quickly adjourn rather than take up the governor's request. Lee announced he's going to call people back. What's he going to... Okay, Mike, you need to be smart. This is where Tennessee citizens are in the perfect place. They have to tell Governor Bill Lee that banning assault rifles and background checks don't work. Been there, tried it. Be smarter than that.
Yeah.
If you want to protect students, get rid of the gun-free zone that disarmed their defenders.
And if you want to, if you want to be very effective at it, really harden schools. Make it so that there's not a glass entryway that can easily be fired at and dropped. I mean, we've all seen the video of that assault, the beginning of that assault, where she, and I will always call it a she, even though she wanted to be called a he. I will always refer to her as her. Anyway, when that female opened fire on that glass entryway and the glass just shattered every which way, she sauntered right on in, barely had to bend down. Was no big deal at all for her to get through there. If you want to protect your students, harden the schools. Allow teachers to defend their students.
Well, I have an advantage over you. At least in this one case, I live down in hurricane season, Hurricaneville, right? We get stuff flying a couple hundred miles an hour. There's hurricane film. You've seen stores that just basically put up a bunch of tape on the glass. Yeah. Well, we do it. It's clear tape. It lives there all the time, so that even if the window is struck, it doesn't drop. I've spoken with school safety officials, and when they talk about doing simple things like that, invariably someone on the school board says, well, but how will the defenders get in? And if there's a fireman in the room, he goes, ma'am, I've got a 40,000-pound vehicle. I can make an entrance any way I want. You take care of keeping the people out. I'll take care of getting my guys in.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a fantastic point. If you're gonna sit, if your plan is to sit and wait for rescue, your plan is to sacrifice children in that time.
Right. And we're talking about body counts 3 to 4 dozen.
Yeah. Let me get a comment in here from CNT again. The monster got into the school in Sandy Hook the same way.
Right. Yes, he did.
Rob, we do have another 800-pound elephant in the room, in the room, and that's the and we've already touched on this a little bit. That's the shooting at the mall in Texas this past weekend. You've got some a list of some failures here. You want
Well, let's hopscotch through it. I'll take one, then
to?
you take
Okay.
the next one. Again, the most obvious one, the murderer had a rifle and a handgun, and we're told that rifles should be outlawed. What the news doesn't tell us is most mass murderers use a handgun. The news doesn't tell us the murderer killed 8 people, but that rifles are used by honest gun owners about 46,000 times a year in self-defense. We want to save lives. How many of those 46,000 defenders should we disarm in the hope of saving 8 lives? That's a tough problem.
Yeah.
If that's what your solution looks like, I think it's a bad solution. Oh, what's
And
next?
well, I want to expand on that a little bit. You're a wizard at math. You in your you, let's for those of you who don't know, Rob is no kidding a real nuclear engineer. The guy can turn a equation or two around. But what I love that Rob has done, he's actually done the math and shows how many people will die because of an anti-gun bill going forward. And the numbers when I first heard them were stunning. But next one, I'm sorry, I got off on a sidetrack here. We were told that we need to have mandatory waiting periods before people are allowed to buy a firearm. What they're not mentioning is that the mass murderer had both of his firearms for years, so waiting periods would not have done a thing to disarm him. They might have disarmed some of the victims.
Right. You and I, because we comment about DGUs, we talk about domestic violence all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Sadly, too many of the victims are disarmed. How long would you like a domestic violence victim to wait before she can use a gun to defend herself rather than have to use her bare hands?
Yeah, and one I want to go back to and wow, we're really burning the time up. I thought we may be done earlier. Ha, big joke. Anyway, New Jersey case,
Yeah.
Carol Bound. She
Yes.
was going through the legal process to not to carry, but just to purchase a firearm. She was doing everything right, everything the way she should. The city, I cannot remember which city it was, but the city she lived in New Jersey drug their feet beyond 45 days, in which they were by law supposed to respond within 30. At 46 days, she was killed when her ex broke into the garage while she was there and bludgeoned her to death.
Right. Yeah. And she had reported, hey, I've got a restraining order. I think I saw my ex. Turns out the ex's sister was listening to police reports and steering him away from the cops.
Yeah.
So, wow. One thing I found interesting, and you and I suspected it, the mall had a no weapons sign on their website.
Mm-hmm.
That legal disclaimer might protect the property owners from legal judgments, but it sure didn't stop the mass murderer from going armed. So what good did it do? Mass murderers almost always attack us in gun-free zones. And yet, the thing that breaks my heart is gun control politicians demand more of the same, and news reporters don't say, but, but that fails all the time.
Right. Alexa, stop. It doesn't. Criminals, by their very definition, are not going to obey bans or laws saying you can't do this. They're going to just keep doing it. They're going to do whatever they want to do. They don't think they're going to get caught to start with the possible exception being mass murderers who think it's probably going to end with me dying or getting away with it. The guy in Colorado that shot up the movie theater thought he was going to get away with it. But he's the one exception to the rule that I'm aware of. So I'm
Shall we close?
Yeah, well, real quickly, I'm all for, if they think they're going to die in the process, I'm all about hustling that along. And then one more I want to touch on here that you wrote. We were told we need to raise the age at which people are allowed to own guns so we might save more lives. The news media hid the fact that the mass murderer was 33 years old. Disarming 18, 19, and 20-year-olds, well, that would not have stopped this guy, and it would have stopped potential people who could stop this guy.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. A lot of the young people in a mall, a lot of the people in the mall are right in that age demographic. And interestingly enough, I believe Texas now has a law that says those kids deserve their carry permit.
Yeah. Yeah, Texas decided not to appeal when the Fifth Circuit handed that decision down. So, yeah, gotcha. Rob, we're now past 30 minutes. Tell us about Self-Defense Gun Stories and anything else you want to plug, man.
After 8 years, I'm an overnight sensation. That 20-minute podcast comes out once a week. I describe how our neighbors saved lives. I talk about what we might want to do if we were in their place. And I'm going to pitch your show, Paul. You let me be a co-host on your Polite Society podcast. My blog is at slowfacts.wordpress.com. The writing is picked up and carried at Amaland and at Opslands.
I got to tell you, man, there's a reason we have worked together so well for so long. I lean on people who are smarter than me, and I count you very high in that list. So, all right.
You mean we're both leaning on John Richardson? Gotcha.
Yeah. You know what? I'm not going to argue that either. There's another brilliant person. That is going to do it for us today, folks. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for people who commented. Podcast listeners, thanks for listening. We're going to go ahead and shut it down now. We'll see you